Pausa rapidinho agora para falar de dica de ouro para os papais e mamães. Depois de experimentar a nova Hug Supreme Care Fralda Roupinha, tudo ficou ainda melhor para o meu filho. É a única com canais em X que se adaptam aos movimentos, com 2 vezes proteção noturna e cintura elástica que se adapta ao corpinho do bebê, além de ser super fácil de colocar e tirar. Praticidade pura. Então guarda essa dica. Nova Hug Supreme Care Fralda Roupinha. Bebê, estamos juntos nessa, mais do que nunca. Agora curta seu podcast.
You know, having that vocabulary of really knowing what you need and want is so vital to living a life that reflects you, a life that is like you. And that has changed every facet of my life for the better, but certainly my relationships.
You're listening to Make Some Noise podcast, episode number 611 with guest Mara Glatzel. Welcome to Make Some Noise podcast, your guide for strategies, tools, and insight to empower yourself. I'm your host, Andrea Owen, global speaker, entrepreneur, life coach since 2007, and author of 3 books that have been translated into 18 languages and are available in 22 countries. Each week, I'll bring you a guest or a lesson that will help you maximize unshakable confidence, master resilience, and make some noise in your life. You ready? Let's go. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the podcast. I am so glad that you're here. Of course, as usual, we have another amazing guest. Someone I've known for a very long time on the internet is finally here with us. Mara Glatzel, talking about being needy, which I'm sure most of us have feelings about. But before we get into that, I wanted to remind you that I have a couple of openings for private coaching right now, this summer. If you are interested in working with me, you can head on over to andreaowen.com/links. That's where you'll find the page to read more about coaching, the page to fill out an application, see if it's right for you. We'll jump on the phone. We can talk about what your primary focus would be while we work together. Maybe I've had a lot of different clients lately that are looking for different things, people who are getting back into relationships and dating, and they're kind of an anxious attachment style, and they want to sort of unpack that and gain some new tools around it. Still the same stuff around boundaries. I still get clients who are struggling in that way, trying to have hard conversations that they just get stuck in. So and I talk about this a little bit actually in the podcast. It's twofold, the work that we do together. Part of it is your mindset around it, your resiliency around it, and getting to a place where you can access that particular perspective and mindset easier. And also the skills and vocabulary, the script, if you will, of what to say to people if that is a particular challenge that you're having. Head on over to andreaowen.com/links. That's where everything is for you to find out more about coaching as well as fill out an application. Let me tell you about today's guest for those of you who aren't familiar with Mara. Mara Glatzel is a coach, podcast host, and the author of Needy: How to Advocate for Your Needs and Claim Your Sovereignty. She teaches fellow needy humans to uncover the most vulnerable and true expressions of themselves and learn how to deeply tend to their needs. Through her online programs, workshops, and retreats, Mara supports people to reclaim space for their own humanity and create ambitious lives filled with meaning without abandoning themselves in the process. You can find out more at maraglatzel.com. And so without further ado, here is Mara. Mara, thank you so much for being here.
I am so excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
I am excited for several reasons. First, to talk about Needy. And I know I've said this about a few of my guests, but I'm gonna gush for a minute because we go so far back to the beginning of the internets. And there was this small group of people. Julie Parker is one of them, Australian. She's been on the show a few times. And, you're another one where we all kind of met, I think, on Facebook in the beginning of this was way back when I was talking about my eating disorder in like 08, 09. Very old. So we've been sort of watching we've never met in person. We've been watching each other's career from afar. My kids have grown up. You got married and had 2 babies. It's such an interesting thing. But what I want to say is that, can we tell the story of the note that you found of mine
Yes. Do you want me-
Okay. Do you tell it? Yeah, because I haven't heard you tell it from your perspective.
Yeah, so I was in the studio at Sounds True recording. I think I was one of actually the last people to record in that studio. So that also makes it special because I
And
don't
they're
know.
in Boulder,
Yeah.
Colorado. Hmm.
Where the note went after that. But I was recording Needy, and it was so intense to record that book. It was so personal and, such long days. And then I was just kind of looking around the room, and I found a little notebook, and I opened the notebook. And it was a note from you to whoever was recording in the studio. And it was this like really encouraging note. I have a picture of it on my phone. I don't remember exactly what you said, but it was basically like, you're doing great. Keep going, which I needed to hear so badly at that moment because I think it was the third day. I was so tired. My voice was going and it's impossible, even if you believe in your project, love your book, it's impossible after sitting in a room by yourself, reading it out loud for 3 days, not to start having some thoughts and feelings about what it's going to be like when people listen to it. And so it was just the perfect moment. And having had that previous connection to you, like it would have been great if it was a random stranger.
Yeah.
Having known you and not even knowing that of course I follow your career and have your books, but I didn't know that you had recorded anything with Sounds True. So it was just so out of context and such a lovely surprise.
It was so serendipitous. That's funny. So I just, because you messaged it to me and I just pulled it up. So what I did was I was in the studio, I think it was a handful of months before you. I spent 4 or 5 days recording Getting Damn Good at Life, which is which is a fantastic audio program, you guys, by the way, with Sounds True. And it was my very last day. And I was making sure I had all my stuff. And there was a blank notebook, like a legal pad it was like a music stand that they have where we put our notes where we record. And I'm like, somebody gives me a blank page, I'm going to write something on it. And I'm probably going to write someone a note. And I said, to the next person recording, you're amazing, and people need to hear your voice, your ideas, and your work. Keep on keeping on, Andrea Owen. And you found it. That was so funny that it was someone that I know.
I know. I found it, and I also like really needed it in that moment, which I think is the most serendipitous part for me. It's incredible how that doubt can sneak in the tiniest and sneakiest of ways. And so to get that little note from you through the universe ideal.
I do that often because I always, and maybe it's from being on this podcast, like from being the host of this podcast, like I know there's people out there that need just a little bit of encouragement, and just a small sentence can go a long way. So I didn't know who was going to get it. I didn't assume it was going to be someone that I actually knew. That's funny. I was so excited to get that from you. So let's shift gears and talk about your work. So let's just start with the word needy, like the title of the book. When I saw that that's what you had titled your book, I was like, oh my God, thank God. Why that title?
The title, I originally chose the title because it was really thought-provoking for me personally. And the book itself is kind of a memoir self-help hybrid. And there's a lot about coming to terms with being a person who has needs, which of course we all do. And yet that idea of being called needy is really repellent. It makes
it's a shame trigger for a lot of people, especially the women in my community that I work with.
Absolutely. And so I picked it because it was tricky for me to unpack. But what became so fun about the title once the book was released, it was like, if you have a feeling if you hear the name of the book and you have a feeling, then there's something for you there. It just became this kind of litmus test that, people who were especially cringing about that title. I'm like, well, look, here, this is the book for you. There's a lot here about the fact that you have needs, what those needs might be, how to begin exploring them in a very compassionate and kind environment. Because we do collectively really struggle, so many of us, with the mere presence. It's like somebody even sees us as having needs. That's so uncomfortable for us to sit with.
I get the question a lot from people in my community when they hear about a behavior or a belief that they have that's not serving them, that they want to change. And they ask, like, where did this come from? Why do I think this way? Why do I believe these things? So from your work and your research, like, where do you think this comes from? Like, specifically talking for people who identify as women.
I think there's it's dual fold. The first is that many of us have had parents who were unable to handle our needs. Mm-hmm. And, now that I am a parent, I can kind of understand that from a different perspective. It's like sometimes you're strapped really thin, you're worried about a million things. And, your kid is just, I have been blessed with children who have so many needs, of course.
Handed it to you.
Yeah. And sometimes you're like, I just can't right now. And so, you begin to have this feeling, which is that my needs, when presented in a face forward kind of way, are overwhelming for people. I love my parents. I see my parents as struggling, as, trying to work and pay the bills and do all of these things. And I don't want to add to that stress. So I don't want to be needy. That's kind of like at best. At worst, we maybe were actively shamed for having needs when we were children, and maybe even in that sort of way, which is don't be so needy, right? That word was used specifically. But I think for women, in addition to that, there is this whole secondary piece of being needy, being seen as needy in romantic love in particular, but in platonic relationships too. It's like, always be really careful. Don't take more than, is okay for you to take, but you never really know how much is okay to take. You don't really know what's on the table. It's very confusing and mysterious, but you want to be loved. You want to belong. You want the person that you're with to approve of you and see you as good and worthy. And so you don't want to be a burden and enter in this very murky category. And we all have this idea of what a needy woman is like. Mm-hmm. It's like the thing
you don't want to be her.
Don't want to be her. No. And so we get this misbegotten idea that our needs are a problem, when actually, and I, go into this in the book, I believe that when we try to pretend that we don't have needs, when we try to run away from our needs, when we diminish our needs in our relationships, that's when the needs become a problem, because the needs don't go away. They just kind of start bubbling out the sides. Like you're like, I'm good. I'm screaming. Yeah. I'm good. I'm,
resentful.
Resentful. So, it's not the needs that is the problem for many of us. It's that we don't know how to get our needs met. And also we presume that somebody outside of ourselves has to meet our needs. And we're socialized to believe that that's love, right? Like, if they love me, they'll just know what I need without me having to ask. Yeah. If they love me, they'll read my mind. If I'm worthy of being loved, then my needs are met without me having to raise a voice, lift a finger. And if my needs aren't met, then what does that mean about me? Enter back into that shame cycle. And so I think there's so much that's unexplored here. And the biggest issue is that we don't have role models necessarily. I mean, now more than ever, but for many of us growing up and through adolescence, we didn't have any role models for people who were talking about their needs, actively meeting their needs in a calm and kind way. We didn't see people talking about their needs with one another. And so we have no modeling for it.
More specifically, like, I don't ever remember seeing someone communicate their needs and then having a conversation with another person about that. So not necessarily, I don't mean like that the other person met all of those needs, because a lot of times that can't happen. Just the dialogue that it takes for two people to figure that out. That's a lot of like the Gottman's work, John and Julie Gottman. And and that's some high level stuff. That's hard. And I kind of grew up like, does that even exist? Like, what? Does that even happen out there in the ether? I want to ask you too about self-care, because I feel like it's sort of directly related. And my listeners are eyeball deep in the personal growth world and get sold a lot of self-care things. So in your opinion, what is the difference between self-care that we're sold and self-care that we actually need? Can you speak to that?
Yeah. So I think that the self-care that we're sold is kind of arbitrary. It's like a light smattering of good ideas that are, it's like you'll get a listicle or even
Kind of generic. Yeah.
yeah, it's like these 10 things will help you. And then they may or may not help you in particular. And if they don't, you're going to say, okay, see, I knew it. It's not worth my effort, not worth my resources. Self-care doesn't work.
Or I'm too needy because I need more.
Because I need
something different.
More and more and more self-care. I need all the self-care. Now, what self-care has to do with needs is that I believe that ideally self-care is responsive to what we need, meaning that it's individualistic, it's not generic, and it is responsive to how we feel, to what our capacity is, to how our body feels in that moment. And so it is something that happens in relationship with ourselves. Otherwise, it's just another thing that we're trying to check off a list without that facet of self-connection. And self-care should be about self-connection, but so often it's not. Mm-hmm. So often we're moving so quickly, we just want to do the thing that's going to help us feel better without slowing down enough to be with ourselves. And that's why so much of the self-care doesn't hit the mark, because you have to have a relationship with yourself to care for yourself in a way that feels good. And that connection on a kind of moment by moment basis to even know what's needed. Sometimes I want to go out. Sometimes I want to stay in. Sometimes I need this. Sometimes I need that, right? And what's going to feel good and what's going to really support me on a moment to moment basis is going to come through that relationship with myself and not be something that I can just outsource to somebody else. Or, I have people often come to me who are like, well, I just want to know the 4 things so that I can just do them.
Yeah.
As if we are the same always, which of course we're not. We have, these phases of our lives, our hormones change, our neurochemistry changes, our relationship statuses change, our desires change. And so too, our care needs to change with those things. We can't just put that thing on autopilot. And so I think that there needs to be a reclamation of self-care in terms of it being a facet of our relationship with ourselves. And I have so much compassion for it being a facet of burnout that we don't have the pace. Like when we need the care the most, we don't have the capacity to do that introspective work. Mm-hmm. But you can keep it really simple. So often it's like that list will be like, take a bubble bath, do this, do that, light a candle. It's like those things may be fine. Even if the way that you're connecting with yourself is to look at a list like that and ask yourself, what feels good to me right now?
Yeah.
What do I need right now? Mm-hmm. Right? It's that self-connection and bolstering out that relationship with yourself, which will enable that self-care to be effective and caring.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I love that. Thank you. We need to take a quick break. When we get back, I want to talk to you about self-trust because I think that's important in all of this. Be right back. Shopify's already taken the cash register online, helping millions sell billions around the world. But did you know that Shopify can do the same thing at your retail store? Give your point of sale system a serious upgrade with Shopify. With Shopify, you get a powerhouse selling partner that effortlessly unites your in-person and online sales into one source of truth. Track every sale across your business in one place and know exactly what's in stock. Connect with customers inline and online. Shopify helps you drive store traffic with plug-and-play tools built for marketing campaigns from TikTok to Instagram and beyond. Get hardware that fits your business. Take payments by smartphone, transform your tablet into a point of sale system, or use Shopify's POS Go mobile device for a battle-tested solution. Sign up for a $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/noise, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/noise to take your retail business to the next level today. Shopify.com/noise. When you're listening to a song on the radio and you get the profound feeling that the song playing was written about you? Now imagine having the power to gift that same incredible feeling to someone you love with an original song from Songfinch that actually is written just for them. Songfinch lets you create an original radio quality song inspired by your own life and the people you love. It's completely unique, personal, and lasts forever. Whether your song is for Father's Day, an upcoming graduation, wedding, or anniversary, or even just a gift to show your loved one how much you care, start your song now to lock in one of Songfinch's top artists. I gifted Songfinch to myself, a song about my late father, and I'm so excited to play you a clip.
Flipping through the slides of learning how to live and how to love, and coming undone a father daughters without, so she writes it down.
One of my clients heard about Songfinch from this podcast, and so she had a song created for her son who is graduating, and she told me that they both cried when she played it for him and that it exceeded her expectations. For a limited time, Songfinch is letting our listeners upload their song to Spotify for free, so you and the lucky person you gift it to can listen to it anywhere, anytime. Go to songfinch.com/noise and start your song. After you purchase, you'll be prompted to add Spotify streaming for your original song for free, a $50 value. Again, my URL is songfinch.com/noise. Don't forget to share your song with us too. songfinch.com/noise.
Pausa rapidinho agora para falar de dica de ouro para os papais e mamães. Depois de experimentar a nova Hug Supreme Care Fralda Roupinha, tudo ficou ainda melhor para o meu filho. É a única com canais em X que se adaptam aos movimentos, com 2 vezes proteção noturna e cintura elástica que se adapta ao corpinho do bebê, além de ser super fácil de colocar e tirar. Praticidade pura. Então guarda essa dica. Nova Hug Supreme Care Fralda Roupinha. Bebê, estamos juntos nessa, mais do que nunca. Agora curta seu podcast.
One of the things that you talk about in the book, and I love this topic because it's been a personal endeavor for me over the last, I don't know, probably 5 to 7 years, is the concept of self-trust. And you talk about that being a practice. So how does someone practice self-trust? Like, what does that look like?
I think the first thing is to suspend your disbelief that whatever it is that's happened to you, wherever it is that you've come from, over the course of your life, that self-trust is possible for you, right? We can rebuild self-trust. Yeah. And I think that many of us hold on to limiting beliefs that, because of X, Y, and Z thing, I am not trustworthy.
I'm going to pause for a second because I think the better question I should have asked you was, how does someone know whether they trust themselves or not? Are there some kind of like check off boxes? I'm assuming it's like they don't trust their intuition when things come up. That's a big one.
For me, self-trust feels like I believe in my own capacity to show up. It's like when the call is issued that I'm going to pick up the phone. If we think about secure attachment in our relationships with other people, right?
Yes,
that feeling of when I need them, they will be there for me. Right? That is, an enormous facet of that emotional connection. And yet with so many of us, we don't have that feeling with ourselves. We don't have it seems like we should because we're just with ourselves all day long.
Yeah.
But we're with ourselves and we're bypassing ourselves because we're busy checking things off of our to-do list, running from here to there.
People.
Life is busy. Rebuilding self-trust. The very first thing that I think is so important is not being a jerk to yourself, right? Because if we think about that phone call piece, like I'm not going to pick up the phone when somebody calls me who is routinely rude, punishing, unfair to me. It's like those are the calls that I'm going to let go to voicemail. I like to think about it that way because it really puts it into perspective. It's like, how am I talking to myself on a daily basis? If it were another person talking to me that way, would I want to hang out with them? Would I go to them with something vulnerable? Would I ask them for help or support when it's needed? No, absolutely not. And so the tone of our self-talk has so much to do with whether or not we have a trusting relationship with ourselves. And I like to say that everything that we say to ourselves either has the potential to rebuild or further destroy self-trust. If you're thinking about what kind of self-talk rebuilds self-trust, it's fair. It's not like you're wrapping everything up with a pretty pink bow or making it be something that it's not, but it's fair. It's like you didn't do your best there. maybe that's disappointing. And maybe I wish that we would have done differently. And maybe next time we're going to try to. But the reality is you're a human. You're not going to be able to get it perfect 100% of the time. Feel however you want to feel about that. But that's true.
Yeah.
Right? So being fair with yourself. You can be disappointed. You can grieve. You can be angry. You can be frustrated. All of that is fair game. But I think you can express it to somebody, as if you were talking to somebody else. You can express it in a way that's not damaging and not punitive. And you're not going to be calling names, and you're not going to be pulling up absolutely every single thing that you ever did wrong in the history of time to, really make yourself feel extra bad about everything that's done. Right? It's sort of like fighting fair, but with yourself.
I've never heard anybody say it like that. And I like that perspective a lot. It's like, you don't need to argue with yourself. Like, just if you're going to be fair with anyone, be fair with yourself first. Yeah. It helps you be fair with other people.
It already hurts,
It does. It does. I also look at rebuilding self-trust, and this comes from my own personal work, if it resonates with anybody out there, is emotional regulation. Because I used to believe with my whole heart that if I opened up Pandora's box, I was never going to stop crying, that I could not handle certain things without completely flying off the handle. And because I had evidence of that, it's like I had a really hard time regulating my emotions. I was always also told that I was too sensitive and that I was too emotional. So I had shame about that too. And I think that it's the realization that I had that sometimes life is going to hand me a shit fucking sandwich. And sometimes I'm going to jump and the net is not going to appear. People are going to disappoint me. People are not going to like me. Once I accepted that these things are going to happen and that I will be able to bounce back from the grief, from the shame, from the sorrow, from the disappointment, all of the really challenging feelings that come along with that. Once I was like, oh, this is going to suck, but I'm going to be okay. That was a huge lesson in self-trust. The resilience of that, mind-blowing, life-changing. That to me is one of the top lessons of self-trust.
Yeah. And for me, it was even that you were allowed to experience those quote unquote negative feelings when bad things happen to you. Because part of my kind of people-pleasing, fawning upbringing was that bad things happen to you and you're supposed to kind of grin and bear it and be very graceful about it. And, so that adds this extra layer of stress to encountering those kinds of situations or any sort of conflict, because then also the pressure was to do it and do it perfectly, to do it gracefully. And so I also found a lot of self-trust in emotional regulation and in letting myself have emotions. Yes. And letting myself tell the truth about those emotions. Really just, that happened to you, that hurt. You're allowed to be mad. You're allowed to express your anger to somebody else, God forbid. You're allowed to, not cave immediately when the conversation's uncomfortable. That was such a big facet of rebuilding my own self-trust, is you're allowed to feel how you feel about the thing.
Yeah. I want to ask you about your own journey in terms of perfectionism and control, because that's a big one over here. I wrote about those two things and how to stop feeling like shit. And that those were the chapters where people said that they resonated with a lot. So can you tell us about recovering from those two kind of chronic behaviors, and what does that mean to you? Perfectionism and control specifically.
My okayness was so married to the situation at hand. And so because I didn't believe that I was going to be okay, because I didn't trust myself to handle any kind of challenging situation, I had to become highly perfectionistic and highly controlling of my environment to try to make sure everyone was happy with me all the time, to make sure I was always, I was kind of above reproach. And people could not like me, but they couldn't say I didn't do the right thing. It was a lot of micromanaging other people's perceptions of me in order to ensure my own okayness, which is such a fool's errand. I mean, I can genuinely say that there was a time in my life where it was like, if all 7.5 billion people on the planet are happy with me, then I will have done a good job. And until then, like, must keep working, must keep, and, you know, so that meant a few things. The first is that I was exhausted all the time because that was a Herculean effort. And the second is I was so watered down, I wasn't really anyone or anything. You know, I had that tandem problem of not really belonging anywhere because I wasn't letting anyone know me. And it was like, I want to just be liked, still having that discomfort of nobody, they might like me, but they don't love me because they don't know me, right? I don't really belong. So I always have that kind of creeping feeling of, if they really knew me, they might not like me quite so much. And so then more perfectionism and more control. And part of how I've worked to recover from that is, well, first of all, not a straight line.
Yeah.
It shows up. I think that's really important. It's like, when I'm tired, when I'm overwhelmed, when the stakes feel really, really high, it shows up again. It's messy. It is still uncomfortable. You know, I used to leave every party and call a friend of mine and be like, was I okay? Like, give me my report card of how was I at that event. I
have people that on this podcast, like people who have PhDs and are so well-spoken at the end say, was that okay? I'm like, are you serious? Like, you're a professional. You're amazing. Yeah.
No, I'm feeling that right now. But, you know, that piece of like, was I okay? What, am I okay? And I will say it's been years and I still want to make that phone call with every part of me, but I don't, because I am committed to reminding myself that I don't know, who knows how I was.
Yeah.
I have 2 little kids. I was tired. My brain is half baked most of the time. I'm sure I was.
Yeah. Well, the interesting question too is like, why do you want to know? Like, maybe that's really like where the work is. And maybe I'm jumping ahead.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing, right? It's like, does everyone approve of me?
Exactly.
And the truth is, not everyone approves of me.
No,
not everyone likes me. Many people don't like me. Many people think that I talk way too much. I'm way too single-minded. And I think, you know, over the course of the last couple of years, it's part of, you know, healing from this perfectionism. It's part of really embracing my own neurodivergence. Like, my brain, I was masking so hard for so many years, and my brain just literally doesn't do what I was wanting my brain to do with all of my might. Like, that's why it kept kind of slipping around the edges where, you know, it's genuinely hard for me to track a conversation. It's genuinely hard for me to not, you know, jump in and talk over somebody else when I'm excited about something. It's like these sorts of things that I judged myself for just for years, raked myself over the coals about. It's like, I'm good at a lot of things, and tracking a conversation in that way, not my highest skill set. And that's got to be okay, right?
Yeah.
If I'm going to accept that there are things that I do well, I'm going to also have to accept that there are things that I'm not perfect at, right? It's like, you can't have one without the other. And so I think, you know, but that piece of why did I want to ask that question? Because it's like, did everyone like and approve of me? It's code for that. The reality is, no, everyone did not like and approve of me. And what is true is that the more that I've come to terms with that, the more that my actual friendships have deepened, because I allow people to actually know me. And that feels really good.
Yeah.
That feels better than how bad it feels to know that some people disapprove of me.
Yes. I want to just kind of underscore a few things. Like, the first thing that you said right out of the gate, that it's messy, it's not linear. We circle back to these lessons as time goes on. And that this lesson is one that I have found with age, I think is sort of a byproduct of just experience in life and also doing this work. I turned 49 this year, and I'm at a place where I'm very aware that I'm not for everyone. Not everyone likes me. And I'm really okay with that, because partly I'm like, okay, there's just like one less person I have to try to impress. Because like, I'm still that person who's going to try to impress people and make sure everybody likes me. But also just, I'm going to be okay if not everyone likes me. And sometimes it still stings, but for the most part, I just don't care. I really don't. And that is glorious. I wish this for everyone. It is so glorious to not care. It doesn't mean that I show up any differently. It actually means that I show up more of myself. Like you were saying, like the neurodivergence. And I'm like, I apologize where it's necessary. If I've interrupted someone, if my volume shot up and I can tell it makes them a little startled or uncomfortable, I might, just at least acknowledge it. But for the most part, I have found that I attract more of the right people and get more positive feedback now that I have let a lot of that go and I'm just and have walked even more into who I am energetically, because I'm not trying to impress the third of people who are never going to like me, who I'm never going to have chemistry with anyway.
Look, the reality is I don't like a lot of people.
True.
My own self. And I'm not thinking terrible thoughts about them. I'm not like wishing them to, a life of misery. It's just like, that person's not really for me. I'm fair, but that's what it is. Yeah. And so I just think, like, how could I expect every single person on the planet to be for me? But, it's still such a practice. It's such a practice in my business too, to really go out on a limb and say what I mean. And, the first time I did the first pass of Needy, it had like all of this kind of evidentiary support in it. I was quoting people, I was using other people's words for so many ideas to, bolster my own argument. And as I was going through the drafts, I decided to take all of that out, which was such an uncomfortable thing for me to do, but it was such a practice in, obviously not like if it was needed, I used quotes where it was needed, but just coming to terms with how I was trying to be like, see, but this is true because not only me, these 5 people that we can all agree are brilliant said something similar, and really standing on my own and really saying like, hey, look, first of all, this book isn't going to be for everybody. But the more straightforward that I can make it, the more that I can like strip away the bullshit. The more it can shine on its own and it can be for the people who it is for. And I think, this process of writing this book and also launching it after it was done and the visibility of that really made me have to kind of like walk my talk. And that was really healing for me to have to do that. Cause I was like, oh, wow. Okay. People I know, people in my town are reading my words and knowing about my things. And thank you for buying the book, but please, can you just like bury it in your backyard or something? It was interesting because all of a sudden it was like, there were just no secrets. Not that I really felt like I had secrets before, but I think that was part of it. It's like, I couldn't be in people's living rooms with them, micromanaging their perception of me because they were having their own independent experience. And that enabled me to let people do that when I was in person with them as well. Yeah. It's like, you can feel however you feel about me. That is quite literally your right. And it's not my job to try and preempt every single thought that you have about me. And I think the other piece is I was putting so much energy into that. And now that I have that energy back and I can use it on things that I actually care about, that's just utterly magnificent.
Yes. Utterly magnificent is right. I love that. Thank you. Thank you for that. We're going to take one more break. When we get back, I want to ask you about taking up space. Be right back.
I'd like to introduce you to the Minimalist Moms podcast. It's hard enough being a mom, and the last thing you need is stress from too much stuff and an overcrowded schedule. For too long, I lived with the mindset that bigger was better, and the more I added to my life, instead of feeling better, I felt overwhelmed. It was time for a radical new mindset. Less is more. I'm not into extremes. I didn't throw everything away. My brand of minimalism is more about adding than subtracting. Get rid of the excess to make room for what you love. In other words, it's about living life with purpose. I hope you'll listen in and my guest and myself can inspire you to think more and do with less. The Minimalist Moms podcast, available wherever you listen to podcasts.
Oh, hey, everybody. It's us, Blair and Molly, your old pals from Toddler Purgatory. 2 moms who are also actors, who are also creative beings, who sometimes feel stuck. And this is our new podcast, Unsticking It with Blair and Molly. What happens when your creative spark just seems to disappear? Gone. Poof. Bye. See ya. What happens when life gets in the way of your creativity instead of nourishing it? That's what happened to Molly and me. We felt like the thing that drove us creatively stopped working, and impending doom had in fact impended. Totally. So we decided to do something about it. And that was steal ideas about getting unstuck from the most creative people we can find. We talked to guests about how to break through the mucky, gluey, sticky wall that can get between you and your creativity. We hear about their journeys, their successes, their challenges, and even their bougie coffee shop orders.
And we're not just talking Bob Ross type paint on paper artists here, though we talk to them too. We're talking to actors, creative directors, dancers, and people who are working hard to be their best creative selves in a world that can sometimes feel real uncreative.
We all have something to teach each other, so let's steal their ideas together.
Join us, won't you, as we deep dive into how to unstick ourselves from the life gunk that can get in the way of our creative freedom. Pandemics, school calendars,
World events, lack of sleep. Oh, get out of their life gunk.
and let's get back to your best creative self. Subscribe to Unsticking It with Blair and Molly.
You're not going to want to miss an episode.
Unsticking It with Blair and Molly, because sometimes life sucks.
No one told us the truth about parenthood. Why? This is the podcast everyone needed before they had kids, because now that those little ones are here, whew, there is a lot to unpack. I'm Rachel Shepardota, and I am your host for the podcast No One Told Us, where we tell the truth about parenting and let you in on all the stuff you really should have known about before having kids. I am the founder of Hey Sleepy Baby, but this podcast is so much more than sleep. We'll be diving into all the topics that you really care about and need to know while you do your best job raising those adorable, tiny humans. Our goal is to just make you feel less alone and less overwhelmed. There are so many things that no one tells us before becoming a parent, and I think that we should really pull back the curtain on becoming a first-time or second-time mom or dad to share the good, the bad, and the ugly. We'll have a little education, a little fun, and a whole lot of heart that goes into each and every episode. So join me and our amazing guests each week to hear us talk about what no one told us.
Okay. In my third book, I actually open with a chapter about taking up space. So I love this topic so much. Can you tell us about your journey and what this has looked like, what it looks like for you?
Yeah. So, I think for me, being a person in a bigger body who's always been in a bigger body, this started kind of literally for me, because so much of my young life was about kind of folding myself over and taking up as little space as possible physically. Of course, there were extensions of that. It's like I was kind of cowering and like pressing my legs together and taking up as little, room as possible. But I also wasn't calling a lot of attention to myself because I didn't want to be perceived. I didn't want to be kind of audaciously living my own life because I didn't want people to think about me too much.
Okay.
I wanted to
just kind of fly under the radar.
There are just untold manifestations of that. It's like not asking for what you need in your relationships, not saying what you mean in the workplace, not letting a friend know when they've hurt your feelings, not saying, sorry, I don't like olives, so I'm not going to eat this olive loaf that you've now handed me and I'm eating and I am hating it.
Not wearing the clothes that you love because they might be bright colored or revealing.
Yeah. And it was just, there were so many places in my life where, I wasn't taking up space. And I really see that as not being truthful to who I am. And so what started as, there's like so many little experiments, but one of them I can say is like wearing whatever I want, like abandoning the concept of flattering. That was one that was a really big part of not taking up space. It was like you only wear things that like look good on your body, that are flattering in a certain way, versus like
and that minimize your waist and
Yes. Versus like, this feels comfortable to me. I like how this looks on me. I like this color. I am a person who loves stripes.
Me too.
And so there's a big stripe reclamation for me. But it extended to really asking for what I needed in my relationships, letting friends know if they've hurt my feelings, it's not the end of the world, not being so conflict avoidant. There were so many facets of my life where I was hiding and pretending, because I was operating under this belief that I needed to make it as easy as possible to be in relationship with me. Otherwise, maybe people wouldn't bother.
Mm-hmm.
And it is so painful to look at that, to think like my self-esteem is so low that I think I have to make it as easy as possible for people to be in relationship with me. Otherwise, they wouldn't.
Otherwise, they will leave me.
Yeah. And
I've
so
been in there.
the practice of really seeing my own strengths and befriending myself and knowing that whether somebody comes or goes, I'm going to be here with myself and by my own side. And, I have a whole host of things that I like. I have a lot of things that I don't like. Learning more about relationship theory so that I could communicate the things that I wanted to say without being completely hysterical, because I was one of those people who never asked for what I needed until it was like a huge explosion.
Mm-hmm.
And then, it was far too late. Or I wouldn't tell friends that they had hurt my feelings until I was like done with them completely. And at that point, the relationship wasn't able to be repaired. And so really letting myself exist, and the shadow side of that, the best part of that, best and worst part of it, is that some relationships do kind of cease to exist. Some relationships you find out, wow, okay, I am not the person for you, but better know that now versus jumping through a million hoops trying to be somebody that you're not in order to stay in a relationship that's too small for you to begin with.
Oh my gosh, I could talk to you forever. I want to ask you one more question though. So, and people ask me this all the time, like you wrote a book on self-care and communicating your needs, getting your needs met. Do you think, did that all feel easy for you? I think a lot of people want to know that. Like, what does it look like in your life, present day?
It feels a lot easier than it used to.
Mm-hmm.
And this is something I've practiced for a long time, but I think what is really important to know is that even though I have the vocabulary and the skill, that doesn't mean all of my needs are met. This is a big misconception. People are like, well, you literally wrote the book about needs, so all of your needs must be met all of the time. And I don't even know if that's possible, actually. But I'm just a regular person. I have 2 small children. I, kind of like stab at the small space of time and energy with my partner the same way most people do who have small kids. And so, there's a lot of things that I need that I don't have the capacity for in this moment. But I think what is so important about this work is that you have the vocabulary to say, hey, I want that. If not now, certainly later. Or if not this, then what is a micro expression of that I can give myself today? Having that vocabulary of really knowing what you need and want is so vital to living a life that reflects you, a life that is like you. And that has changed every facet of my life for the better, but certainly my relationships, because there's a fluency there. There's a vocabulary there where before it was just the frustration of wanting something and not even knowing exactly what I'm allowed to ask for. Like even the concept of what am I allowed to ask for? People would say, well, what do you need? I'm like, well, what's on the table? What are the possibilities?
I needed to see a menu.
Yeah. And now I'm like, oh, okay, I get to decide what's on the table. And you get to decide if you're available for it. And how amazing it is we can have these conversations that I'm not interpreting your reaction as validating my needs. Like my need is valid whether or not you have capacity for it. We're all doing the best that we can. And sometimes we meet each other in our needs and sometimes we are not able to. But having that vocabulary and really understanding that my needs are my responsibility, first and foremost, they begin and end with me, has been really liberating.
Oh, thank you for that perspective. It made me think of so I coach a lot of people one-on-one and whether it's in their personal life. And I've actually over the last year been doing a lot of like executive coaching and leadership. And it's all the same. Like at the end of the day, the topic is a little bit different, but people are all the same. And what the work comes down to, quote unquote, is many times it's two different things. It's your mindset around it, your perspective around things, what you believe, your self-talk, like that type of stuff that we talked about. And also having the skills and the vocabulary to have certain conversations, either the conversations that you're having with yourself or having conversations with other people. A lot of times our sessions those two are the two main topics. Sometimes it's advice and more consulting that I'm doing. And then other times it's coaching around the mindset stuff. And I want to just kind of underscore what you said, because I think this is so important for people to know, like what the work actually looks like, even to people who facilitate and teach it for a living, like you and I, is that it's not that things become non-existent for us to work on anymore. It's just that we close the gap. So they aren't a problem for as long, because we end up getting to a place where we just can't stand the discomfort of knowing that there's a problem and knowing that there's a solution as well. Like, whereas before we're just like, I don't know what to do about it. It just sucks, where you just sit in it. So that gap gets smaller and smaller of seeing the problem, knowing that there is one, and then also taking action on it and working on it. And yeah, for me, it never becomes like I never cease to have discomfort.
Mm-hmm.
I still do. I still loathe hard conversations with, like, especially close family members. Oh, I'd rather get a lobotomy. Like, they're the worst, but they're necessary. And I'm not going to die. I'm going to be okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that is just such an important point. It's like we consider that healing means I no longer experience discomfort. And I really think about healing as I'm experiencing discomfort and I have a whole host of tools to meet myself in that discomfort. And certainly less discomfort than there used to be. I used to actually think I was going to die when I was engaging in conflict. And now I'm just uncomfortable, but being uncomfortable is uncomfortable. And so, having those tools to not be afraid of that, not, kind of run screaming, but instead say like, okay, well, what do you do? What do we do when we're uncomfortable? So important.
What do you have going on this summer? Like, first, the book Needy will be in the show notes, of course, and your website. But do you have anything going on that you want to tell people about? How can they hear more about your work?
I don't have anything specific going on this summer, but I will this fall. And the best way to hear about it is and also I have a fun quiz. So it's a twofer. Ooh. Go to my site, maraglatzel.com //quiz. And there's a fun quiz that asks you, what do you need right now? And it'll give you, kind of direct you towards one of 5 answers. And there's a lot of great resources in there that can help you start to meet those needs with greater ease and fun, certainly. And then you'll be first to know when I have other things rolling out this fall.
Awesome. maraglatzel.com /quiz. We'll put that in the show notes for sure. Thank you so much for being here finally. And listeners, thank you so much for your time. I know how precious it is, and I'm so grateful that you choose to spend it with me and my guests. And remember, it's our life's journey to make ourselves better humans and our life's responsibility to make the world a better place. Bye for now. Hey everyone, thanks again for listening. I would be so incredibly grateful if you haven't done so already, if you could leave a review of this podcast on Apple Podcasts. Super easy if you already listen to your shows over there. But if you don't, or maybe you have the app on your phone, but you listen to the show on a different app, if you could leave a review for this show, it matters so much. I wish I could express how much it matters. I also wish that it didn't matter so much, but alas, it does. So if you haven't already, please go review and rate the show. It would mean so much to me. And thank you so much. I hope you have an amazing day.
Hey there, I'm Debbie Reber, the founder of Tilt Parenting and the author of the book Differently Wired. The mission of Tilt is to change the way neurodivergence, whether that's having a learning disability, having ADHD, being gifted, autistic, or some combination of all of the above, is perceived and experienced so differently wired kids and the parents like us raising them can truly thrive. On the Tilt Parenting podcast, I get to talk with authors, therapists, educators, and parenting experts who are committed to this mission. I ask the questions my listeners are most curious about when it comes to supporting our kids. And in turn, my guests share strategies for challenges, out-of-the-box ideas for navigating school, best practices for therapies, tips for advocating, and so many thoughtful insights on what it really takes to help our kids grow up feeling seen and respected so they can create awesome lives for themselves. I know that raising a differently wired kid can feel overwhelming and isolating, but I promise you, you are not alone, and it can feel so much better. If you're on this parenting journey, come listen to Tilt Parenting. Together, we can shift this paradigm and show up for our exceptional kids with hope, possibility, and joy.